Hi, welcome to the Restoring America podcast. My name is Jeremiah Poff. I'm the editor of Restoring America. I'm today joined by Tiana Lowe Doescher, the Washington Examiner's esteemed economics columnist. Tiana, thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me, Jeremiah.
Well, we're trying something a little different here. So I just, there's a whole lot that we can talk about, but I think the two things today that I'm most interested in are kind of looking at what Trump has done over the last 6 months, in compared to what he did in his first term. It's just it's almost been kind of hard to keep up at the breakneck pace that the administration has been operating under. But um, I've been rather stunned by how efficient they've been this time around, and they haven't been bogged down. Even when drama has threatened to derail and everything, they've just like soldiered on as if nothing. With an impervious attitude towards those kinds of things. At Signalgate, forget it. We're just gonna we're gonna ignore it for a little while, and then we're gonna make Mike Waltz UN ambassador. I mean, all of this kind of I mean, to me, it just goes to show how much how Trump and his team like learned from the first time around, and were really ready to go to war this time around.
Oh, I feel like one of the most remarkable things, if you remember 2017, at this stage in the game, Trump tried and failed with, repealing the Affordable Care Act, and it was skinny repeal. No one had any idea if you were going to get any sort of tax bill, let alone the transformational juggernaut that was TCJA. You had people dropping from the administration like flies. We were on our second or third chief of staff or White House comms
Yeah, I
director.
mean, we
Oh,
had we had Scaramucci, we
yeah,
had Priebus out,
Steve
we had Bannon out,
Bannon.
Gorka
Yeah,
out. Like this, just a revolving door in the White House. And who's left the administration besides Mike Waltz?
and even Mike Waltz is still part of the administration. He
Right.
didn't leave in ignominy, right? He's still filling a valid role. And it's interesting just to see how the closer the operations have been to Trump directly, the more efficient they have been, right? At the end of the day, this time around, following just the one big beautiful bill, which shocking that Republicans have not allowed themselves to take more of a victory lap on that, not just preventing a $4 trillion tax hike on Americans, but also, that increased child tax credit, no tax on tips, no tax on overtime, which I believe will have much bigger macroeconomic effects on the economy than Trump has gained credit for. Beyond all of that, it was Trump that was forcing the Senate to move. John Thune is new at this. And while John Thune, great Republican, that job is hard being the Senate majority leader. And Mitch McConnell was actually quite good at it. Mitch McConnell obviously can't serve anymore because he's very old. He's very ill. So at the end of the day, it was Donald Trump that was making those moves. He was engaged in a legislative way that I think the last president we saw, or the last member of the White House who was that good at it, was Joe Biden during the Obama administration, right? Donald Trump, historically, in his first term, he was not an incredibly effective whip at those votes. This time around, he was. So you have that. And then, so for instance, Doge has been pointed to as one of the more mixed bags of the administration. That's because Doge wasn't really Trump. Trump gave Elon Musk free reign for 6 months. And, when Trump is more involved, something like, let's say, the tariffs, because Donald Trump is not an ideologue, because he is focused on the bottom line, he's very successful. He paid attention to the bond markets, walked back the tariffs, has given us 90 days to come up with much better deals than what would have happened alternatively.
I mean,
So I would just say, so, I mean, all in all, this is a 6 month streak that has shocked even my fairly high expectations.
Trump in his campaign, and even in the years in the years that he was out of office, he would periodically talk about how when he came to Washington in 2017, he didn't really know anybody and he kind of trusted all the wrong people. And I think there's a lot of things to be kind of gleaned from that, because one of the reasons that I thought that Trump was going to be in a better position after he won the last election, I thought he was in a better position to govern effectively than he would have been if he'd even won in 2020,
Correct.
was that because of even things like January 6th made Trump like everyone thought was going to be toxic. That was the end of him. And it obviously
Yeah,
wasn't, but it served as a sort of a cull for all of the people who who would align with themselves by lip service, but really didn't believe in the political project that he was advancing. And I think that that's one of the biggest differences between Trump 1 and Trump 2 is that you have an administration, I think, this time around that really does believe in what he is doing and the political project he's advancing. I mean,
yeah,
you have a whole you have Republicans in Congress now who, you would have never ever said anything positive towards a tariff, 5 or 6 years ago, have all of a sudden realized that, maybe Trump was onto something with what he was doing. And, the predicted economic calamity hasn't materialized. You've got the president of the EU, making a homage to Trump in his own golf course in Scotland, and then agreeing to to buy what's it, $500 billion worth of energy. I mean, no, it's astounding to me much how efficient the operation has been this time, how effective he's been with his own team in domestically, but then also in how he's interacted with the rest of the world. And
yeah.
I mean, as you said, like it's surpassed even my expectations. I mean, I won't say that everything he's done so far has been perfect. I think he's had some faux pas here and there. Uh, Maybe not necessarily him personally, but people within his
Yeah.
team. Um, you know,
But
I think
everything, but I think it's important to note that everything Trump has the most leverage over have they have been to an extent the most successful, right? Let's just think about him taking out Iran's nuclear weapons capability. That is a promise that has been made by every Republican in both of our lifetimes, and nobody's done it. Trump was able to do it because he threw out two of the core neocon statutes of how foreign policy must be conducted. One, Trump said, we can go in, do something, and just leave. We don't need to stay in nation build. We can do what's in the American interest, which is use our bombers and use our bunker busters to just take out the nuclear armament and then leave. We don't need to take out the Ayatollah. We can let the Iranian people do it on their own. We can just show them that when we are at the table and when we say you have 60 days to come to a deal, on the 61st, we mean business. And
it's
then,
funny you bring up the Iran strike because I had a general skeptical view of that when it first happened. I was not thrilled. I was nervous about where it could go. I thought it was rather a I was one of, the group of conservative, Trump supporters who was a little skeptical of the idea of a preemptive strike or anything like that. And I have to say that I was it the way it went down was not what I expected.
no,
And I think um that that the I mean that Trump just basically he did it and then he let the Iranians have a face saving, strike so that they
yeah,
didn't look like, and then that was the end of it. Like, and no one was hurt. No one, nothing was.
no, not one American troop hurt, not one pair of American boots on the ground. Because Jeremiah, to your point, I think what a lot of Republicans have PTSD over is the idea that like W or John McCain would have gone in, done the strike, and then said, okay, now we need to stay and we need to fix the entire, Iranian regime, which is obviously a dumpster fire. The Iranian regime is a human rights terror. They are still the world's number one sponsor of actual terrorism. But the American interest is the Ayatollah in charge of the Iranian regime. The American interest is, does Iran have the ability to have a nuclear weapon or not? He took care of the American interest and then he left. And we just aren't used to a president that goes in, does something, and leaves. And that is why Trump is so different. He's not a Democrat. He's not an isolationist. He doesn't believe in America last. He doesn't love, having Russia or China or anyone else step on us. But he also doesn't believe in nation building or democracy promotion, which are just things that are not in the American
Or
interest.
even just like aggressive intervention in conflicts where there's no, even where we're not even in Libya there was, oh, you could argue Obama didn't engage in nation building, but he was involved in destabilizing a regime that arguably didn't really have an American interest in the region.
No,
And
no,
I
and
think,
doing the no-fly zone, and
yeah.
which is why whenever I hear, I call them fake MAGA. Whenever I hear fake MAGA, now that they've been proven wrong about the Iran stuff, I understand the skepticism about it before, but now that we aren't in World War III, there's no threat to American life, troops. We are not committing our men to a war that has nothing to do with us. Fake MAGA will still say, like, oh, Donald Trump has just become a neocon. The fact that a no fly zone hasn't even been a part of the conversation among anyone in the Republican half of the aisle over Ukraine or over Israel just goes to show how much Trump has changed the entire GOP. Like, he hasn't just changed it during his terms. That was true during the Biden administration. All Republicans, when Bill Kristol and the Democrats were trying to institute a no-fly zone in front of Ukraine, we said we remember Libya and what a disaster that was. And Donald Trump was a beneficiary of that and put that into the Republican muscle memory to oppose that.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that to some degree, I think there are still probably some Republicans who, if they could speak freely without having electoral repercussions, would probably still have wanted a no-fly zone in Ukraine, or even or a more aggressive intervention in Iran. But I think to your point, Trump changed the GOP, changed the way that the voters view these kinds of issues, and the general skepticism is, okay, prove to me why we should get involved, not prove to me why we should leave. Um,
Exactly.
and I think that's just one of the many areas that Trump has changed the GOP. But I think, to pivot here from to another part of this, he's also changed the Democrats, although they'd be rude to admit it. And, you know, to the point where you've recently written or on Twitter and elsewhere about how there's been this backlash over among the Democrat intelligentsia, shall we say, not necessarily Democrat politicians themselves, but to this ad that's, a provocative, sexy ad for American Eagle with actress Sydney Sweeney, where we're now deciding that jean ads are racist because they have beautiful women in them, I guess. Um, I, I'll let is that, do you think that in a certain way Trump has, the woke still hasn't receded from the Democratic Party in,
No, they're gonna die by it, Jeremiah. And here's why. If you look at what the Democratic constituency actually is, it has been monopolized by the most hyper neurotic, hyper, anxious, and people who have fixated on that anxiety and that neuroticism to the point where it dominates their entire constituency. You saw this really clearly with COVID, where if you talk to normal Democrats in blue areas, once they got vaccinated, they're all like, okay, so why can't I have friends over for happy hour? Or why can't my kid go back to school without a mask? But they were so publicly scared to say it because the whole constituency has become dominated by the most neurotic type of person that, is typified as, hyper progressive, hyper educated white Karen. But it's true across the board. Nate Silver published this graph showing self reported status of mental health. And it's true that, being married and having children and, being religious, these are all things that have an upward marginal benefit in your happiness and your mental health and your self-fulfillment and your earning potential, yada, yada, yada.
but they've
But the
also
thing about
become right coded.
that, so these things that have become right coded, which, 15 years ago were just normal. You just got married and you had kids and maybe you still worked and maybe you weren't necessarily a trad wife but it was just having kids is normal. That's what we've literally been doing for millions of years. Even though those benefits are truly, demonstrable, self reported mental health between liberals and conservatives across the board liberals are so much more unhappy, to the point that even though a married parent who is a liberal is happier than an unmarried childless liberal, an unmarried childless conservative is still happier than a married parent liberal. And I think this explains a lot of the resentment politics that you see in everything from, we need to blow up the global economy and have socialism because other people can't be rich, to Israel must be the oppressors because Gaza is poor. It's all just a toxic, it's just a toxic combination of just resentment everywhere. Where does this fit into the Sydney Sweeney thing? The Sydney Sweeney ad, from an aesthetic perspective, is very modern. It's very in tune with what Gen Z already likes. If you think about like the old Terry Richardson ads for American Apparel or Guess or Abercrombie and Fitch, I'm thinking from like 2004, when I remember seeing all these like famous jeans ads. The lighting was really high contrast. The poses were, very provocative, very little clothing wore, lots of like topless jeans ads, or in the case of like Abercrombie and Fitch, no clothes at all. The Sydney Sweeney ad, the American Eagle ad, she is fully clothed. The lighting is fairly soft and diffuse, and she's not even saying anything quite so sexual as people are bringing up, like the Calvin Klein ads with Brooke Shields, who was 14 at the time, so that was very creepy. But Brooke Shields is very overtly talking about sex and her body. Sydney Sweeney in this ad is not. She's saying her jeans. And when she's saying her jeans, she's clearly referring to her very famous curves, which probably deserve an Emmy on their own at this point. But for all the fact that it should be a very accessible ad for Gen Z that could not handle a Terry Richards pictorial if they saw one today, their minds would be blown if they went to Tumblr circa 2007 with like Brandy Melville ads, right? Even so, they have to rush to find this problematic, and they can't find a sticking point. USA Today said it's problematic because jeans signify that Americana is good. Washington Post saying, it's evocative of eugenics because clearly she's talking about jeans because she has blue eyes and blonde hair. And then NPR saying it's just like the Brooke Shields ad, even though Sydney Sweeney is almost a 30-year-old woman who's fully clothed. And I think it just comes down to resentment politics. They cannot stand that a healthy looking, right? Like Sydney Sweeney is not a stick. This isn't like an anorexia thing. That a healthy looking, almost 30-year-old blonde woman is happy with her sexuality in a way that doesn't involve overtly exploiting herself. They can't fathom that.
But I think that's there's something like I'll be the first to admit that I'm not a huge fan of provocative advertising campaigns. But when you're like, no one who like sees the ad is going to be like, oh, she's a Nazi, like, which is
No.
what I think, that neuroticism that you mentioned is I think really what's so makes this so absurd is that, I look at that and I'm like, oh, it's just another ad with a woman showing her curves, like most, like there's a whole bunch of other ads like it. And then, but, somebody else whose brain is like consumed by everything and everywhere is that shows that it isn't, fit perfectly into the worldview that I've constructed for my political project
Yeah.
is Nazism. And I think that's that neuroticism that you talked about. It's like, okay, we're using genes in a double entendre, which I'm sure it's hardly the first time that anyone has ever thought of that joke before.
No.
It's like
And
it's one of the most absurd things that I've ever seen, and I think it kind of goes to something that I don't it goes to the Democrats. You know, they have a problem with their image because the people who identify with them are so out of touch with reality,
yeah,
and the people who leave the party are so unwilling to make a strong statement about that.
when you build your entire worldview around the idea that individuals have no agency, then any
Well, but they don't.
politics
But
or
that's the thing is they don't.
advertising.
they don't necessarily say that. There's a big contradiction there because sometimes they will say that, but then other times when it comes to things like abortion and other things like that, they take it to another extreme of to an extreme individualism that justifies other things.
Yes, I mean,
It's an
but
internally contradictory worldview.
but I would say on net, even the abortion thing, the idea behind their obsession with abortion is that there's no possible way an adult woman is capable of planning a pregnancy before conception, right? Like that's so much of the worldview that it's not enough that the ACA has covered, hormonal birth control and IUDs for the last 10 years now. It's not enough that Plan B at every state level is accessible to anyone, basically. Because their entire worldview is built around the idea that individuals don't have agency. So any advertisement or political message or global conflict that comes with the added benefit of you can aspire to do something differently, right? If you're in Gaza, you can choose to not vote for Hamas in 2006. If you are overweight, you can work out. That is what like a lot of historically speaking, advertisements were meant to be aspirational. It's supposed to be, oh, if I get a bra from Victoria's Secret, I get to look like Giselle Bundchen. And a lot of the conservative mentality, look, like, can conservatives have we historically gotten somewhat callous about some issues? Yes, housing affordability is a big one, right? Like we can tell people to work hard, but if cities ban private industry from building houses, no, it is not as easy to buy a house today in a two-income household as it was during our parents' generation. But for the most part, the conservative worldview is about if you work harder, if you work smarter, if you don't make catastrophic decisions like having a child out of wedlock while you haven't finished school, you can have a pretty good life in this country. And there are always policy perspectives that we should be looking at for how we can make it easier. It's why we do things like the child tax credit and whatnot. But the liberal worldview has been obsessed with the idea that everyone is a victim of something. And you see it in the lionization of Luigi Mangione. You see it in just like the resentment politics of Bernie and AOC's oligarch tour. No one has explained to me how the oligarchs are making any of us any poorer. And they don't have an explanation for that. And I think the Sydney Sweeney thing, just the start. I mean, it's a couple on like a bit of old fashioned jealousy, I think, just like when you see like Doja Cat and a lot of other female influencers being catty. But I mean, this is the lie about liberal feminism. It's never about lifting other women up. It's always about tearing other women down under the guise of we know what's best for you.
Yeah. I mean, I do, taking a little bit more of a 30,000 foot view of it and like what it pretends for the future. I have like wondered if that sort of that neuroticism, that insanity that is still pervasive in the party is ultimately going to, you know, continue to be a liability going forward. Like every historical trend says that Republicans will lose the House next year. And, if we're following recent history, Democrats would have a good chance of winning the presidency in 2028. And
Yeah.
all of a sudden we could everyone will look at 2024 and it was just a cycle of anti-incumbency and that's just still continuing. But I don't know. I have a sense that might have more staying power. And I think that the fact that the Democrats are still, they're not raising money. Their polling is at like 30%
Yeah. I
approval.
mean, they might have some luck with some elements of like good rare candidates. Like I think Roy Cooper running for Senate in North Carolina makes that a really hard seat for Republicans to
But
keep.
even that, I mean, even he is not actually that big. Like people think that he's some sort of this like political savant who's managed to you know per but he really actually isn't. He won by
No.
13,000 votes, I think, the first time around, and then he won re-election, with 51% in a state that is pretty darn close to 50-50.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, it's probably like 52-48 Republican. Like we're not talking about Larry Hogan winning re-election in 2018 in Maryland, when 20% of the state's population is a registered Republican. I think Democrats definitely are happy he's running, and that's good, and it's probably he's probably the best candidate for them. But broadly speaking, I don't think that he's all that impressive,
Well,
and I don't
and
and I
also
don't think
broadly
that
speaking, I don't think like these good local candidates can save the national map.
right, and
Because
that's
the fact
that's
is,
the
do we
thing.
believe Andy Bashir or Josh Shapiro can win the 2028 primary? I don't think so. I think they're still going to be tethered to the activist base.
Well, and I think yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I'll be I maybe we'll get our political fever dream of a brokered convention. Because they're no one they're so divided for in 2028. But even just go looking at the midterms, like I mean, I don't I'm not I just wrote a piece about how I'm not even convinced that the Republicans will lose the House. Um,
I'm
but
not convinced either. Not with, I mean, big, beautiful bill. I've had my problems with not just the bill, but also the long term debt math for the country, not for Republicans, but for the country. But the fact that, we spent what, $1 trillion on raising the salt cap might actually save that margin that
well, and
that
and
will
and
keep the House for
Trump's very
Republicans.
clearly very interested in preventing another impeachment, and he's pushing Texas to redistrict to knock out five Democrats, Missouri to knock out another one, and Florida to knock out three more. And these are all things that cumulatively will probably make it a lot harder for the Democrats to accomplish what they want to accomplish in winning the House. But what do you even do when you're not when your own party brand is captured by neurotics who want you to fight and are mad that you're not fighting in the way that they want you to fight. But if you fight in the way that they want you to fight, you're alienating the people that you still need to vote for, that you need to vote for you who didn't vote for you last time, and you don't have
I
money.
will
So,
I will say the biggest upside for Democrats is not anything they can do, but how Republicans can mess this up.
mhm.
We cannot we cannot let the third worldism and the resentment victimization politics that has successfully captured the entire Democratic Party establishment at all trickle into the right. And we've seen like a little bit of it, right? Like I think we've seen a little bit of mainstreaming, especially with like the Israel Gaza stuff. Some of this same resentment style politics, if you look into a room and one person's doing better and another person's doing worse, you must automatically assume it's because the richer person's victimizing the poor person. We should be a big tent. We need to be a big tent, and I think that's a good thing. I think it is why Trump, the fact that he has a lot of voices in the room and responds to incentive, is willing to make a decision and not triple down when it's proving to be less than optimal, is why he's been so successful, especially in this term. But we just want to make sure we do not become. I see a lot of the left wing rhetoric, especially just the propaganda about the Israel stuff. We can't embrace it because it's just a Trojan horse, right? Israel's not the biggest conflict, or Israel's not the biggest problem for the U.S. It is one global conflict of many, one horrifying one, but like there are many other problems going in. It's about the mentality. We need to remember that this country is great because we built it. No one gave it to us. Everyone who came to America came here, fought for something, and built something. And that's a good thing.
Tiana, I think that's a great place to leave it there. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jeremiah.